Hi. Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. My name is Claire Carpin, and I'm going to be moderating this event. This is a TACCon event as part of the Artist Co-op, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things today, but specifically the goal, as they announced this, which I think is really helpful for us to frame this, is to address the systems that allow sexual harassment, misconduct, and abuse to be able to persist in the theater. And we'll discuss possible solutions to dismantle this negative behavior. Just to introduce myself, like I said, I'm Claire Carpin. I'm a writer and director. I'm also have been starting to work to address these problems through Time's Up, this movement that you might have heard of. And also, I'm a counselor with Actors Equity, an elected counselor. That said, I am not representing anything. I'm not representing equity here in official capacity. That's just something that you can know in case you want to ask me anything about the union. I can put you in touch with people and help you understand how that works. And also just I am somebody who is been very interested in trying to address these issues. And so through my work with these different organizations and also just as a writer and director, I'm not writer, actress and director. I try, maybe I am a writer. I'm also interested in how I can help be an advocate for safe working environments and productive working environments. But I'm very excited here today to be a moderator. So I'd love to the panelists to go around and introduce themselves before we get started.
Cool. Hi everyone. My name is Shakina Nafak. I am a actress and a director and a writer and a producer. I'm the artistic director of Musical Theater Factory, which is a development organization here in New York City. And I'm also a social activist. So do a lot of work to represent and advocate for the trans community, specifically in the entertainment industries.
Hi, I'm Diana Oh, and I am a performer and actor and singer-songwriter, art maker, creator of film work, director of their own work. Artist of color working to queer the world with their radical non-complacency. I use she, her, they, them pronouns.
Hi, I'm Alexis Williams. I'm a literary agent in theater at Brett Adams. Former jack of all trades in different aspects of the theater, but now sort of doing the lit agent thing. I'm thrilled to be here.
Cool. I also wanted everybody to know that we have a person on site, Robin Sokolov, who is part of the Crime Victims Treatment Center. So if anybody wants to talk with somebody on site in person, she's certified by New York State, and everything that you say to her is completely confidential. So if anybody has anything that they need to share and they want to talk to somebody, she's right there. Likewise, if anybody is watching online through Facebook Live, we've posted on the Artist Co-op page a list of resources. So everything from if you want to go get legal help or you want to reach out to people at unions or the Actors Fund or therapeutic resources or mediation resources, there's a whole list of numbers up there. And likewise, anybody online, if they want to add anything, any resources to that space, please post and add things as well. And as we talk today, I encourage people to reach out. There's a lot of people out there who can help, can really have the resources to help, and now help in such a way where your confidentiality is protected if you want it to be. You know what to do, and there's like free legal help now too. So I highly encourage you to do that if you need to. Before we get started, I just wanted to, first of all, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer at all. Like I said, I'm somebody who's just been curious about this and has been learning a lot. So this is going to be me just sharing what I've learned about like what sexual harassment is in a legal framework. And what I've come to learn is that sexual harassment is essentially a form of discrimination, and it's protected under discrimination laws. And there are two forms. There's quid pro quo, which means this or that, which means that you are put in a position where you have to exchange sexual favors, or you're pressured to exchange sexual favors in order to keep your job, get a job promotion, things like that. That's quid pro quo, as I understand it. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. that said, also there's hostile work environment, which is what it sounds like. If there's pervasive hostility, and the place that you are working is and your work is compromised because of this kind of behavior. So that's some way to think about it. And just quickly, we'll talk more about the nuances of what that is and our experiences and how that manifests itself in our workplace. But the other thing that you can know, again, these resources are available for you if you feel like you've experienced this or you know anybody who has. But additionally, some things you can do is Equity has this sort of good advice, which is like, let me see if I can get it right. Respond, record, report. Respond being you can just respond to the harasser in the moment. Of course, we know that that's probably the hardest thing of all. Then there's record. You can start to record incidents in which you've experienced some sort of discrimination or harassment, and just write down like incidents and dates and times and witnesses and what happened and all of that. And that helps you sort of build a record in a case. That can be useful. And then there's report, and that's where all of these resources come in and the people that you can talk to about that and can be helpful. And show you avenues in terms of like legal ways or mediation ways or HR ways or whatever you want to do in order to deal with the problem. That said, let's get into what the problem is. So I was hoping that we would just start with hearing you guys and your experiences. You know, what kind of harassment or discrimination have you experienced in the theater workplace, and how has it affected your work, and just what kind of problems are out there for us? Anybody can kick off.
I've been yelled at, and it's not okay. I've been yelled at by people who were supposedly on my team, working to get me opportunities, and to take that kind of verbal abuse of being called names by someone who's on your team, and to think that it's something that we have to swallow and take. It is a false narrative. I've been yelled at by directors, and I won't do it anymore.
When you say yelled at, like what? Can you give like an example of not necessarily maybe of what they've said, but like what the circumstance has been in which they feel like this is okay, or
when I've made an artistic decision to take care of myself and my artistry and my voice, and when it has been in conflict with the monetary choice of what makes sense money-wise, I have been yelled at for making that decision to honor the things to take care of myself. And like friction is cool, like artistic friction, like that's sexy, I suppose. I'm sure, whatever. Find your own way of working in the process. It's when you start to understand the things that are being said to you and the way that they're being said are or because of how you are genetically born into this world, you pick up on the nuances there. So without me going into like, here's all the fun things I've been called in my life, you can use your imagination. That is an instance, and it's real, and it happens. And I was quiet, and I took it for about 8 months when I was like, I'm not going to play this way.
Just one little follow-up to ask, because I'm curious. Now that you are not going to take that anymore, how did you find the kind of strength to respond, and what has the response been when you start to kind of speak truth to power in these circumstances?
It's been the best. It's been the best.
Great.
Speaking truth to power is the best, and it's all you have at the end of the day. You have to live with yourself and follow your dope North Star. Like that. I just did a workshop this morning teaching this thing about like naming your dope North Star and following it, and it's like when I spoke up, it was like the lid popped off. It was like possibilities were born. I was able to literally remove the toxicity out of my life, and from that, I feel like it gave birth to a whole new vagina. Like it was just like the girth got wider. I was ready to smash it, you know. I recommend it to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very freeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. So in practical terms, what does that mean? I wrote an email and I was like, bye. I wrote an email saying bye.
Yeah. It's amazing the power that comes from knowing you can walk away. And then when you walk away, you realize, oh, I did have power.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Shakina, what's
Yeah, I mean, just building off this thing that you mentioned about believing this false narrative that you have to accept being treated a certain way. For me, there's a fine line between behavior that might seem like microaggressive behavior, and then when that crosses over into like, no, I think this is like discrimination that I'm experiencing, into like, wow, this is harassment. I need to label it as such. And I've seen for myself and witnessed power relationships, especially because I think in the theater we have this like deeply entrenched hierarchy of roles, where I've seen those power relationships become sort of like imbalanced and then problematic and then abusive. And it happens in that slow boiling water, cook the frog sort of thing, where like you're just in it and you don't realize that it's unacceptable or that it's getting worse and worse. And a couple things that I want to bring up, because I think there's like there's maybe assumptions we make about like obvious sexual harassment, the quid pro quo one that you mentioned, which is like, well, yeah, if you have to like put out or get out, something's wrong. And like when there's an assault or violence, I think we largely know how to label that, although clearly public discussion these days we don't. But one of the things that I want to bring up as a trans person, especially like a non-binary trans person, is the way that my body is central to my work. Like not every trans person has a solo show called Manifest Pussy, but like my work is like about my body, and I bring my body to my work. But my choice to talk about my body and to share stories about my body and to show my body is my choice. And I make those choices on my own terms in environments that I construct artistically for myself and frame.
Right.
And I think there's like such a public conversation right now around trans identity and so many questions that people have that for me, I found that folks feel like really at liberty to discuss my body, with me or in front of me, asking me questions or making assumptions. And I have to be very careful to say, like, what I put out into the world is not what every trans person is comfortable putting out to the world. I'm sort of doing it for, like, edutainment, But I think it's important that everybody know that really, like, beyond asking what someone's preferred pronoun is, those kind of questions, like, take you into the territory of harassment and discrimination. And I'd love to talk more about how, like, in the trans community, we view misgendering as discrimination or harassment. It's not just like an oops accident, especially not once things have been made clear. It like pushes the needle further and further over the more that it happens.
So just to clarify for my own sake, so what you're saying is if you are clear about this is how I'd like you to refer to me, or this is what that when people don't pick up on that, even though you've made it clear, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's every environment is different, and I think people have more dexterity with genderqueer, gender expression, and gender fluid pronouns, and depending on like what environment you're at. Some places it will be completely new to them, and other places they roll with it because it's been a part of their community.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if I come to a job and I say, like, my name is Shakina, I use she, her pronoun, and then the second rehearsal, it happened again, and I corrected him, and I think even someone next to me said it. Then it happened a third time, and it puts me in a really terrible headspace to have to go out to, like, it's literally minutes before I'm on stage getting my mic fitted, and then I have to go be a character, and I've just been, like, shot back into something I'm not. And so I said, if you call me sir one more time, I'm going to punch you in your fucking face. And then the stage manager came to me because I had threatened violence to even though I was speaking hyperbolically, of course, but I was very, very frustrated. But sort of the way that the problem escalated, it became I was the person who, like, would have gotten written up on that occasion. Thankfully, the stage manager really understood what's going on because they had witnessed. But and from very like indie projects to very very high level professional projects, I have been misgendered in a repeated fashion, which then is in that way of like I was mentioning of how something becomes sort of like, oh, oops, a mistake, to like, well, it's feeling discriminatory, to like now this is like harassment behavior. And even though I don't think it was ever done antagonistically, but it creates an unsafe work environment. I cannot, as a performer, do my job if I'm like in a state of post-traumatic stress because people keep assigning me to a gender that I've worked so hard to escape from.
Especially when you've made that clear. When you've made it, you've communicated clearly that that's the way you need the work environment to go so you can do your job.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess that's something that has been striking me a lot these days, which is that like there's the twofold experience where first of all your just personhood is in conflict, is in stress and trauma and conflict, but then the other sort of unspoken piece of that is that it compromises your ability to actually do your job. That the whole reason why we're talking about this in a workplace scenario, because we can also get out of the workplace and talk about all of the problems and issues with our culture and the navigating personal relationships. But in terms of the workspace, it's that when that stuff is not dealt with, then it influences your ability to actually do your job, and then that influences your ability to advance in your career and do good work. Yeah.
And I want to celebrate so much with this particular panel the genetic makeup that you have put together on stage to speak about this. That often it can get torn into these binary terms of men and women. We're at this fever pitch right now where it's like all this stuff that women are experiencing, that men are doing onto women, and we're perpetuating this very violent narrative that the world is separated into the binary of male and female without recognizing that that is its own form of violence. You have erased gender complexity and choices, and we have to truly demystify. I mean, just like it's a fucking lie. Like it's not true anymore. We're not split into male. I'm just gonna do this for the rest of the day. And when you were talking, I was like, holy shit, we're missing that in the theater. In our profession, we're artists, and we're missing that in our work environments. I can't even imagine what it used to be like when you go working at fucking office, you know? Like, and it all comes down to the way that we're having sex, and I'm gonna stop.
I also, in particular, that we've seen or not seen because of the like consistently suppressed New York Times article, that this kind of abuse is not relegated to the feminine side of the gender spectrum in our industry.
Right.
There is so much harassment and especially the quid pro quo kind directed towards men, in the cisgender men in this industry, and gay and straight.
Yeah.
So. And I think it disproportionately so in our industry versus other industries. I think you wouldn't see as much abuse, sexual abuse, directed toward cis men in maybe any other industry other than like the entertainment industry.
Yeah, well, I don't know if this, but something you just made me think of is that like our industry, speaking of how our industry is different than other industries, like our industry does traffic in sex, violence, transgression, conflict, like all of these interpersonal, I imagine is unique to our industry because it's so collaborative and we deal with this like very intimate kind of work. And so, I wonder how, it's one of the things that I sort of liked, I think both of you guys were talking about maybe before this panel in our emails, is that is to talk a little bit about like how to keep the work sexy and dangerous and all of that, but how to create a safe space where that's actually possible. And I guess what you were just saying about how it affects everybody, that there is something about the power dynamic in the room in terms of like that we're dealing with this kind of material, and yet there's a power dynamic where there's like a director and a casting director and producers and artistic directors and executive directors that are in the world with us, in a world where maybe you're like naked on stage, or on a screen. And so, that is kind of unique to our. I mean, how do we help people with that? Any?
I mean, I have.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask that question. So I feel I'm curious what the things that are in like the equity rule books around nudity on stage and things like that, at least to relegate what's happening in a room. I mean, that doesn't really help for when folks are, the cast is going out for drinks after or whatnot. But in the moment, like I feel like, and I'm coming at it from a different side, from the lit side of it all. But I don't know, like I feel like there are some of those.
There are written, they're definitely written in.
I mean, I've heard horror stories about shows that feature nudity where that's brought up in the audition room, like from the jump. Like, well, you're going to be naked in the show, so we need to see you naked now. And like, I don't know what the rules are equity-wise, but it certainly doesn't seem like the first lead-in to casting successful acting.
Right.
We know someone in the house knows what the rules are. Would you share them with us from behind the camera? Or come up here real quick?
Sure, yeah.
This is Kate. I was like, I know where they are. Hi, I'm Kate Montana. I'm a casting director and I'm producing this experience with the Arts Squad today. So equity does have a lot of rules about what can happen in an audition room. I just recently cast Afterglow, which is a play off Broadway that features a lot of nudity. And a big reason why I wanted to take the show was to make sure that every actor who came in for that process felt really taken care of. And we decided that nudity did not need to be a part of our audition process. Yay! Right? But Actors Equity really has taken care of making sure there are lots of written rules and laws about what can and cannot take place in the space. There always has to be an equity representative present in the space. So if you are auditioning for something that is an equity show that requires nudity in an audition and you do not see an equity representative, you need to leave that space. It is not legal for you to do that.
I would say also report it to Call Equity.
100%.
Yeah.
And also, there's required for you to have like a screen in the space for you to disrobe and feel comfortable in your own body, in your own space before you share of yourself, which is what that moment is. There are a lot more rules. All of them are available online. There are PDFs of this stuff through the Equity website. So you can be taken care of. But I really do question, from a personal perspective, from the way I run my business, having nothing to do with equity, when we share of ourselves in this world, 9 times out of 10, we do not get to see another person's body before we experience it. And for my best practices, I don't understand why that needs to happen necessarily in an audition space. So it's not a part of our choice for Afterglow. I'm going to go back there is now, but okay.
I mean, there is, some of us, in my own personal sort of work trying to so equity has a structure where members can be on committees. So if there's something on a contract that you've been on or that you experience that you don't like and you'd like to see changed, you can join a committee or you can contact committee members or that kind of thing, and you can actually start to, so for example, I think there's some people who think that nudity should never ever be in auditions, and there is a world in which you can approach through equity in the contracts and then negotiating, because we have to negotiate with the producers, but you can advocate for that. And I personally do really question it. I mean, I think in my personal world, understanding all of this now, I would say what would be the dream role is that nudity is not allowed in auditions at all, except by special approved request. Because I think you could make a case for at the end of all certain callbacks, like maybe there's a case in which nudity is important for some. I don't know what that case would be, but I can understand that somebody would make that argument, and I think that maybe then you could get approval, as opposed to it being just a thing that exists that there are protections around. So that's another thing to think about. But
also intimacy choreography.
Oh yes. I'm such a fan of this.
It's a newer professional title, intimacy choreographer, and it's being brought in more frequently. I don't think that there are, maybe Kate knows, I don't think that there are regulations about when an intimacy choreographer is required yet by the union.
Not yet, but I'm advocating for that because I'm a huge fan that it should be dealt with like fight choreography.
absolutely. It's like lower down on my resume of skill sets. I've done integer choreography for shows.
Oh, fantastic.
I've also worked in directing pornography, so I have
Oh.
some history with choreographing sex.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really incredible to work, especially I worked on a very misogynistic play, in which I had to choreograph a sex scene, and it was so important to me to come in as a feminist and begin that process with the woman first, really understanding what the sexual choices would be from the character's perspective, and building a sexual encounter choreographically, move by move, on stage that was going to be reflective of what the actual psychological life of these characters were and the decisions that they were making. And even though this scene had to encapsulate a skeezy power dynamic, I would say, it wasn't abusive, but it was definitely icky. We built it from the opposite. We built it so that the woman in the situation was the leading everything, so that she felt safe while simulating something that was violating. And it was really an awesome experience.
Yeah, I've started to talk to intimacy directors, and they have also such great language, which I think also comes. Some of the language, it sounds like, also comes from sort of the kink community and all these variations of actual sort of real world sexual relationships that people have figured out how to make it really safe and fun, and they've started to bring that in. And one that I shared that this intimacy director, her name is Alicia Rodas, and she's now really starting to work with Intimacy Directors International, which I think was started by Tonya Sim, I think. I might be getting her name wrong. But she said something that really struck me, which was that she said, the person in power can give you permission to do something. Let's say the director says, okay, grab her and kiss her. They just gave you permission to do it, but you still need consent from the other person. And that kind of goes for anything, in which case you can go, okay, great. And then you turn to your fellow actor and you say, is that okay with you? And then when they give you consent, then you can go ahead and do that. And that could even go with okay, now you scream at her and you tell her blah, 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 blah. And you can be great, is that okay? And then you both have permission from the director and consent from the other actor. And that the person, but I think she also said something about if the person hesitates for a second, then that means it's got to be a bigger conversation. If there's a moment where they're then that's okay, talk about it, because that's not a green light. That's a yellow light, and you want to be a little more, you want to be sensitive to that. But there's this whole movement afoot that feels like it's really valuable.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
And I want to unpack that one thing you just said about when you pause and it needs to be a longer conversation, and that we have to allow that processing time when it comes to talking about sex and gender, and that we've gotten into the bad habit of not allowing processing time, that we've become such productive monsters that it's we need the results right away without taking into consideration that intimacy takes processing. And so holistically speaking, it's well, why are we here? How did we come to this boiling point? It's well, what's happening behind closed doors in your sex life that's then translating to how we're going to present it to the world in a narrative way. There's another fight house, there's Uncle Dave's Fight House, and they are a queer and trans-based y'all know them?
No, that's great.
Oh my, I feel like everyone, Uncle Dave's Fight House, okay, great. And my friend is, I need to ask their permission if I can reveal their name later, but when I do, I will let you know. But they're incredible and involved in the kink scene, and they will choreograph all the sex.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. It also occurs to me that because we're talking about scenes with sexual content and all that stuff, that one of the things that I also feel is helping change the conversation, and this is where we can help as artists, is in the content that we're producing. I know, Alexis, you as a literary manager, how do you I mean, are you getting a sense that there's any shift there for the better, or what's it like from the?
I mean, I feel like folks are more actively trying to say, when you say, oh, what are you reading for these days? Here, that they're actively looking for more work by women and artists of color, you know? That is a line that I hear a lot, and I feel like there are companies where I absolutely believe that line and it's showing up in actual programming. And there are other spots where it's like, you say that, but then you have, you know, all plays by like dead white men, but you know. But I don't know, I do think that the fact that folks are at least saying those and some are kind of starting to walk the path of trying to bring more diverse voices in and more women writers in is great. And then that works up on stages and, you know, leads to good things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do we keep it going? Like how, you know, because like just you saying that there are people who are like maybe saying the line because it's in vogue now, you know, how do we stay persistent about that change actually happening?
I mean, I feel like we can do it with the theaters that we're choosing to support, we're choosing to go, like where we're choosing to put our money down to buy tickets. I feel like there are amazing organizations like the Kilroys, which are, you know, a list of plays by women that have not been produced, have only had one production yet. And that's gotten a ton of traction in recent years. And now you actually have theaters looking at those lists and really like pulling those plays and producing them. I feel like it's really just like keeping those conversations going. I mean, this one has the Lily Awards are amazing. And I want to give you a shout out with Baby No More Times. So one of my clients directed a show featuring phenomenal Diana and others called Baby No More Times, which is, I feel like I want to let you describe it, but I feel like I just like
I want you to describe it.
It's like a pop concert meets feminist anthem, where they're a Spice Girls-esque group, and all the songs are about like female empowerment. You know, there's a song called Control that's about like birth control, and it's great. But I don't know, I feel like those exciting pieces that are out there or resources are just great things to add conversation and help people sort of change along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I got brought into that particular project as a performer. It was created by a group of 3 artists, Melissa Lusk, Caroline McGraw, and Mary Birnbaum. And then it's like run into this other thing. I forgot what it was. Yeah, use your outlet. It's so great. Please keep going. We can only do it all together. You know, like what I'm learning is that it's like it begins to crystallize when everyone's coming together, like people behind the table, with the people in front of the table, with the money people, with the producers, with the artistic directors, all coming together to make active choices. And that's exciting.
Yeah, from the trans perspective, we have a group on Facebook called the Trans Actors Guild that now has nearly 500 members internationally, mostly from New York, Chicago, and LA, but from all over the world. And it's a closed group, so you can only join it if you identify as somewhere in the trans umbrella, and if you're not an actor, that you at least perform in addition to the other work you do in entertainment. One of the things that we do that's been really great is we talk shit. You know, like if we've seen casting notices where we'll share it in the group and decide who's going to respond, and we will like collectively decide to boycott the casting notice, or we will author a response to whoever's casting to say that this was really inappropriately written, or who's writing this project, who else is trans on the team. And when we have horror stories, we will share them. And sometimes anonymously or confidentially, but other times we will label people as not safe to work with or not respectful. And that keeping the community informed has been really, really important. And that solidarity you're talking about is really key, because I think it is about like all of us coming together, or about all of us stepping away and saying like, you know what, we're not gonna audition for this role or roles like it. Not only do we not want to see shows where this sort of behavior happens on stage, or work with a director where this sort of behavior is heard to be happening off stage, we won't go in for those roles anymore. As an artistic director, I won't program those shows anymore. Like, I'm not interested in telling those stories that way. The more we kind of collectively decide to change the culture and then dictate that you can do that, you can put up work that's like empowered and feminist and not relying on sexual violence or the exploitation of women and still make money for your theater company.
Still do really exciting
Still do
work.
really exciting
Yeah.
good work. You can still win awards. You can
Yeah.
still be nominated for things. Then it's like, oh, we don't need that to lead with.
Right.
And I think that's
I think what you're saying is so helpful too, because the thing that I'm learning is that, like, whether it's like in a large movement of people or a very small circumstance of, like, you're working on a show in a rehearsal room and you feel like it's a hostile work environment or an uncomfortable environment, that I feel like it's very often, it's easy to think, oh, it's just me. I'm just thinking this. Nobody else is having this experience. I need to, like, get over it or figure it out. And then all you have to do is reach out and talk to someone else, and they often are having the same experience, or they are witnessing what's happening to you, and you're not alone and you're not crazy. Yeah.
And I feel like this moment is so great because, I mean, great and terrible. Great in that a lot of people are starting to speak up, and it just takes one to instill change and inspire others to the same
Right.
thing too, you know?
And I think it's interesting too that on this panel we could talk about surviving assaults and we could talk about more aggressive behavior, but the things that it seems like we're leaning toward are these real subtle aggressions that create a culture of misogyny and harassment.
And the other thing that does, which I think we all know, but I want to give voice to, is also because I was just reading a great article. I think it was on the Interval, just about lighting designers, and the thing that, like, what ends up happening is that if we don't sort of speak up and find our own power, then these systems people end up leaving the business, or they just don't get opportunity. And then you find the big change that I hope is happening now is that people are making a point of trying to hire people who are different or with different perspectives, and really, like, mentor people is going to help people get into places of power who are more aware and more of the nuances of all of this stuff, and therefore are able to deal with and create spaces that are safer and more inclusive, so that the work is better, so that the work gets better.
And conversely, if we experience or witness this sort of microaggressive behavior that would fall into discrimination or harassment, and we don't uproot it, label it, call it out, we get permission for more severe actions to follow suit.
Yeah, like you were saying with the boiling pot of water on the frog. It's like every little step makes it a little bit more okay,
Right.
and then you get into really dangerous situations like we're all coming out now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And there's also there's the power in hybridity, and I'm seeing, I'm observing it's almost like this, I'm watching people come out of the closet of, like, I am a hybrid artist because I am running out of patience to play in your playground that has glass in the sand. I cannot keep cutting my fingers this way. And it's like, I have to go find my own sand, and get it myself. And I think there's an immense amount of power in that when I see actor friends. I mean, just turn to a different outlet, knowing that there's more to be said as a performer. I certainly identify with that, and I think that is a tool.
It's really interesting because when you say that, I think about how there's, like, it seems like slowly we're garnering more professional trust for the multi-hyphenate artist or the hybrid artist.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, how, I don't know if I'm articulate this as well, but, like, how that earlier I was talking about this sort of archaic hierarchy that exists within the theater industry, and how that structure of power allows for abuse to occur. And the more that we can have confidence and not only, like, oh, from within I feel that I can be my multi-hyphenate artist, but also, like, we're gonna program more. We're going to fund more multi-hyphenate artists. We're going to invest in the mentorship of artists who do more than one thing. Could be setting up new rules in which that type of behavior, not only like would be less likely to happen, but would almost be structurally more difficult to occur because it's not relying on that division of labor that is exploitative.
It could teach people new ways to work, and that can upset the power dynamic. Yeah, because even within our like sort of the very basic traditional way of theater making, I think you can create a room that's way more collaborative, that feels like the power is more equal. But often you just have to have people, but that depends on people in power instituting that. And like if you do kind of upset that a little or complicate it, it can maybe make it a little less, or teach people how to do that. Great. So we are basically we're heading towards the end of when we have to wrap up. Before we do, I just wanted to see if I know flies.
Yeah.
Good conversation flies. I just wanted to see if there's anybody here or if there's anybody online who has any questions that they'd like to ask of our panel before we wrap up. Yeah.
Yes. In terms of systems that are either already in place or sort of burgeoning, I remember reading about Marina Ireland starting the sexual harassment sort of mediation team or crew. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm curious as to what is there right now in the business that can be looked at to either be bolstered or that's kind of coming up and may have some issues with it that we see as next steps.
I mean, I can speak again about the Trans Actors Guild, and there's also a Trans Hollywood group that's sort of similarly rooted in LA. Something that I think would be an amazing next step for those bodies is to be able to have some sort of legitimate place at the table with the unions, so that we go from being an independent guild to really like an advocacy committee within the union, because there are certain changes we'd like to see happen in terms of protocol that we can talk about amongst ourselves, but finding that institutional support would be a huge next step for us.
On that note, you might want to look into the EEO and diversity committee. That might be a good place to start. Equity has an EEO committee where you can start helping. There may be some institutional change in there, and also there was another, and I forgot it. But anyway, that's something that might be we can talk about.
Great. And could I just say also that I think what's important in seeing that sea change is that the support for that inclusion and policy adaptation comes from cis allies, because it can't always be the responsibility of trans people to educate the cis people and figure out how to pay for things and make things happen logistically, because we're already working sort of at the bottom of the ladder with a lot of systematic oppression.
Right.
So I think what's going to be great is when we see more cis allies that were already in place in the unions here reaching out to help lead the organizational charge and find economic support for the trans artists who are taking time out of their hustle to make things safer for other trans people and look better for the industry as a whole.
I think that's very true.
And to get really base and honest, I think if each individual took it upon themselves to watch queer porn, I mean, that's so, please, in a way that it's go home and reassess your individual pillar of how our bodies have been complicit. There are certain narratives that I've played out because I've been taught a very heteronormative way of presenting myself, and it's when I just took that moment to partake in queer porn, fund it. There are I will happily provide you a list, to just see what it looks like, to see consent and communication, different bodies, just something else. Have your mind expanded, and that will inform your everyday things.
Similarly to, I love that, by the way. I love that. I think that is so, that's, but similarly, I think just other ways that, something that I'm learning about just how to, sexual harassment claims and that kind of stuff is it's really tricky because if you experience something and you go to your company's HR, which they have in place, they are legally bound to protect you, but still the HR person's responsibility is to their employer, and so they can't protect your confidentiality. They must tell the employer that you are experiencing this. So I have to say that all of the resources that are coming up that are outside of that employer dynamic are really, I think, really helpful, even if it's just a therapist to talk to walk you through stuff. So on the Facebook page, I listed a bunch of the ones that I know, but I think there are a lot more. So I feel like just getting the word out there that those resources do exist is really helpful, because the system right now as we have it is you experience something and then you try to go to your stage manager, or you try to go to your the company manager or somebody within the sort of producerial structure, and that can work out really well, but also sometimes their hands are a little tied, or that they don't even know how compromised they are, because their job rests in the employer's hands, and so the outside resource can be really useful. But also, just what I'm really excited about that everybody's doing now is talking about it, because that was the problem for so long, is everybody knew, and there were these whisper networks that were not as official as a Facebook page or a closed group, and thank God those now are there. But we knew this was happening, but nobody felt comfortable enough to actually talk about it because there were no consequences. And now it feels like people are finally speaking truth to power in great numbers, and we're seeing actual consequence. So continuing to talk about that, and continuing to feel comfortable talking about sex, which is part of the problem. Part of it is the shame that has come from people.
Sliding scale, artist friendly, they will accept you.
Thank you guys. I feel like we could talk forever, and we'll keep talking here. But thank you to all of you guys for coming. If you have any questions, I guess we'll be around now to ask, but also there is that Facebook page and those resources. So thanks so much. I hope this has proved informative. It's been great for me. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. Thanks, guys.